The mining station, hung in the void like a metallic tumor against the star-speckled darkness, its industrial arms extending outward to harvest precious minerals from the asteroid belt. Commander H of the Empire watched through the observation deck as human cargo ships approached the station, their crude but functional vessels contrasting sharply with the sleek design of her own fleet. Another delivery of human laborers, her second-in-command, Lieutenant announced with barely concealed disgust. I still cannot understand why the High Command insists on using these creatures for our mining operations. H's crystalline blue skin shimmered slightly as she turned from the viewport. Like all, she stood nearly 7 feet tall, her elongated limbs and graceful movements a testament to her species' evolution on a low-gravity world. Her large, multifaceted eyes could perceive spectrums of light that humans could never imagine, and her telepathic abilities allowed her to sense emotions and surface thoughts from others. Yet these humans remained frustratingly opaque to her mental probes. The humans are efficient workers, she replied diplomatically, though privately she shared some of A's reservations. Their physical resilience and adaptability make them suitable for dangerous mining operations that would cost us too many lives. The truth was more complicated than either officer cared to admit. The human species had been discovered 3 years ago when scouts encountered their primitive vessels exploring their own solar system. What should have been a simple first contact scenario had quickly escalated into something far more complex. Humans, it turned out, were remarkably resistant to telepathic influence, and their seemingly chaotic and unpredictable behavior patterns made them difficult to control through conventional means. The Empire, spanning 17 star systems and encompassing dozens of species, had developed a refined system of integration for newly discovered civilizations. Most species, when faced with the Empire's overwhelming technological superiority, either surrendered immediately or were quickly subjugated through telepathic manipulation. They prided themselves on being benevolent conquerors, offering advanced technology and galactic citizenship in exchange for compliance and service. Humans had proven to be an anomaly. Rather than submit or flee, they had fought back with a ferocity that surprised even veteran military commanders. Their primitive weapons posed no real threat to ships, but their tactical unpredictability and apparent willingness to sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like freedom and independence had prolonged what should have been a brief conflict for nearly 2 years. The war had finally ended not through victory, but through an unprecedented negotiation. The human governments, faced with the inevitable destruction of had agreed to provide workers for industrial operations in exchange for technological assistance and a form of limited autonomy. It was a compromise that left many on both sides dissatisfied, but it had at least ended the bloodshed. As H watched the human transport vessels dock with the mining station, she reflected on the strange relationship that had developed between their species. Humans were classified as a protected labor species, which meant they were provided with adequate living conditions, medical care, and compensation for their work. But they were not granted full citizenship rights within the Empire. They existed in a gray area between slavery and employment, a status that made many uncomfortable but was deemed necessary by the High Command. Commander, interrupted her thoughts, the station administrator is requesting permission to begin processing the new arrivals. Granted, H replied. I want a full report on their physical and psychological condition, and remind Administrator that these humans are to be treated according to Protocol 7. Any abuse or mistreatment will result in severe disciplinary action. Protocol 7 was the set of guidelines established for human workers, recognizing their unique psychological needs and social structures. Unlike most other species in the Empire, humans formed strong emotional bonds with each other and exhibited signs of severe psychological distress when separated from their social groups for extended periods. They also required regular access to recreational activities and maintained complex cultural practices that had to be accommodated to prevent work disruptions. As the docking procedures continued, H found herself studying the human vessels more closely. Despite their crude appearance, there was something undeniably ingenious about their design. Human engineers had managed to achieve remarkable efficiency with limited resources, creating ships that could traverse interstellar distances using technology that was centuries behind standards. Their ability to innovate and adapt with minimal resources was one of the traits that made them valuable workers, but it also made them potentially dangerous if they ever gained access to advanced technology. "Commander," a communication technician called out, "we're receiving a priority transmission from High Command." H moved to the communications console, her long fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The image of Admiral materialized above the console, his face and weathered expression marking him as a veteran of the human conflict. "Commander H," the Admiral began without preamble, "I trust the human worker exchange is proceeding smoothly." "Yes, Admiral. We are currently processing the new arrivals according to established protocols." "Excellent. I am contacting you because there has been a development in the Terran situation. Our intelligence networks have detected increased activity in the outer colonies, and there are concerns about potential resistance movements among the human population. I want you to implement enhanced monitoring procedures for all human workers under your jurisdiction." H felt a familiar knot of unease in her stomach. The peace with humanity had always been fragile, maintained through a careful balance of incentives and deterrence. If resistance movements were indeed forming, it could lead to a resumption of hostilities that would be devastating for both species. "What specific measures would you like me to implement, Admiral?" "Increase surveillance of human communications, conduct random psychological evaluations, and watch for any signs of coordinated behavior or unauthorized leadership structures. The High Command is particularly concerned about the influence of human military veterans who may be attempting to organize resistance cells." "Understood, Admiral. I will begin implementation immediately." The transmission ended, leaving H alone with her thoughts. She had always prided herself on her ability to understand and manage the various species under authority, but humans continued to puzzle her. Their motivations seemed to operate on principles that logical analysis, and their emotional responses were often disproportionate to their circumstances. "Commander," approached again, "the station administrator reports that one of the new human arrivals is requesting to speak with a commanding officer. Apparently, he claims to have important information about conditions on Earth." H considered this for a moment. Such requests were not uncommon, as humans often believed they could negotiate better working conditions or treatment through direct appeals to authority. However, given the Admiral's warning about potential resistance movements, it might be worth investigating. "Have him brought to interview Chamber 3. I will speak with him personally." "Are you certain that is wise, Commander? Perhaps it would be better to have station security handle the matter." H's multifaceted eyes focused on her subordinate with mild irritation. "Lieutenant, I have been managing relations for over a decade. I believe I can handle a conversation with a single human worker." 20 minutes later, H found herself seated across from the human in question. The interview chamber was a sterile white room designed to be psychologically neutral, equipped with both visible and hidden recording devices. The human sat in a chair that had been adjusted to accommodate his smaller stature, his hands resting calmly on the metal table between them. Doctor, according to his identification records, was a 34-year-old former university professor from Earth who had volunteered for the worker exchange program. His file indicated advanced degrees in xenobiology and psychology, which immediately caught H's attention. Humans with scientific backgrounds often adapted better to life in facilities, but they could also be more observant and potentially problematic if they became dissatisfied with their situation. "Dr. H began, her voice carrying the subtle harmonics that most species found soothing. "I understand you requested to speak with a commanding officer. What concerns did you wish to discuss?" Looked up at her with dark brown eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her appearance. Unlike most humans she had encountered, he showed no signs of intimidation or fear in her presence. If anything, he appeared curious and alert, as if he were studying her as much as she was studying him. "Commander," he said, his voice calm and measured, "I wanted to discuss the integration protocols being used for human workers. I believe there are some fundamental misunderstandings about human psychology that could be addressed to improve efficiency and reduce conflicts." This was unexpected. Most humans who requested meetings with officers complained about working conditions, food quality, or separation from family members. Doctors seemed to be approaching the situation from an analytical perspective that was more typical of thinking. "Please elaborate on these misunderstandings. H said, leaning forward slightly. Well, for example, the current housing assignments appear to be based on social preferences, with individuals separated by work specialization and hierarchical rank. But humans are social creatures who form bonds based on shared experiences, cultural background, and personal compatibility rather than professional function. The current system is creating unnecessary psychological stress that could be easily avoided with minor adjustments. H found herself genuinely intrigued by his observations. The housing protocols had indeed been adapted from standard integration procedures, and she had noticed higher than expected levels of what human psychologists called depression among the workers. What would you suggest as an alternative? Allow humans to form their own social groupings based on personal choice, within reasonable security parameters. Provide common areas for recreation and social interaction. And perhaps most importantly, recognize that humans need a sense of purpose and dignity in their work beyond mere survival. As Doctor spoke, H began to notice something unusual. Unlike other humans she had encountered, his emotional state seemed remarkably stable and focused. There was none of the underlying anxiety or resentment that characterized most human workers, even those who had been cooperative and productive. Doctor, may I ask why you volunteered for the worker exchange program? Your qualifications would have made you valuable in Earth's academic or governmental institutions. Smiled slightly, and for a moment his expression became almost wistful. I've spent my career studying the possibility of extraterrestrial life and intelligence. When first contact finally happened, I knew I had to be part of it, regardless of the circumstances. This is the greatest opportunity for scientific discovery in human history, even under the current conditions of limited autonomy. Commander, I grew up reading stories about humans exploring the galaxy and encountering alien civilizations. The reality is different from what we imagined, but it's still remarkable. I'm sitting here talking to a being from another world, on a station orbiting an alien star, participating in a galactic civilization that most humans never dreamed was possible. The circumstances may not be ideal, but the experience itself is extraordinary. H felt a strange stirring of something that might have been respect. Doctor's perspective was unlike anything she had encountered in her dealings with humans. Most viewed their situation as a form of captivity, focusing on what they had lost rather than what they had gained. His ability to find wonder and opportunity in circumstances that his fellow humans found oppressive suggested a remarkable psychological resilience. Your attitude is unusual, Doctor. Most of your species express dissatisfaction with their current circumstances. Oh, I'm not saying I wouldn't prefer more freedom and autonomy, replied with another smile. But I've learned that you can't always control your circumstances, only your response to them. And I'd rather spend my time trying to understand and improve the situation than lamenting what might have been. Their conversation continued for another hour, ranging from practical suggestions for improving human worker conditions to broader discussions about the challenges of cooperation. H found herself increasingly impressed by Doctor's intelligence and insight, as well as his apparently genuine interest in finding solutions that would benefit both humans and. As the interview concluded, H made a decision that surprised even herself. Doctor, I would like to offer you a position as a cultural liaison between the human workers and station administration. You would be responsible for identifying and resolving integration issues, as well as providing recommendations for policy improvements. The position would come with enhanced living quarters, access to the station's research facilities, and a degree of autonomy in your daily activities. Eyebrows rose in surprise. That's unexpected, Commander. May I ask what prompted this offer? Your insights into human psychology could be valuable for improving operational efficiency. Additionally, your scientific background might prove useful for other projects. H paused, studying his reaction. However, I should warn you that this position would also make you responsible for the welfare and behavior of your fellow humans. Any problems or incidents involving human workers would reflect poorly on your performance. I understand the responsibilities, Commander, and I accept your offer. As Doctor was escorted to his new quarters, H remained in the interview chamber, reviewing the recording of their conversation. Something about the human intrigued her beyond his obvious intelligence and unique perspective. Perhaps it was his apparent lack of fear in her presence, or his genuine curiosity about culture and technology. Whatever the reason, she found herself looking forward to future interactions with Doctor. For the first time since the human conflict had ended, she felt optimistic about the possibility of genuine cooperation between their species. If more humans could adapt to galactic civilization as successfully as Doctor appeared to have done, perhaps the current arrangement could evolve into something more equitable and beneficial for all involved. Little did she know that her decision to elevate a single human to a position of authority would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything she believed about relations, the nature of beauty, and the unexpected ways that understanding could develop between seemingly incompatible beings. The mining station continued its slow orbit around the distant star, its industrial operations proceeding with mechanical precision. But in the quiet corridors where humans were beginning to interact as something more than captors and captives, the seeds of change were already beginning to take root. 3 weeks after Doctor's appointment as cultural liaison, the atmosphere aboard had begun to shift in subtle but significant ways. Commander H observed these changes from her position on the command deck, watching as human and work crews collaborated on the installation of new mining equipment with an efficiency that hadn't existed before. The improvements had started small. Doctor had suggested modifications to the human living quarters that allowed for communal spaces and flexible room assignments. He had also proposed changes to the work rotation schedules that took into account human circadian rhythms and social bonding patterns. Each suggestion had been carefully researched and presented with supporting data that demonstrated potential increases in productivity and decreases in psychological stress indicators. What surprised H most was how readily the human workers had accepted Doctor's authority. In society, leadership was typically determined by telepathic strength, age, and demonstrated competence in hierarchical structures. But humans seemed to follow Doctor based on entirely different criteria: his ability to articulate their concerns, his willingness to advocate for their interests, and what they called his authenticity. "Commander," Lieutenant approached with a data pad in hand, "the weekly efficiency reports are available for your review." H accepted the pad and scrolled through the statistics. Productivity in the human work sections had increased by 12% over the previous 3 weeks, while incidents requiring disciplinary action had dropped to nearly zero. Medical reports showed decreased stress hormone levels and improved sleep patterns among the human workers. "These improvements are significant," H mused. "Has Doctor submitted his next set of recommendations?" "Yes, Commander. He's requesting permission to establish what he calls a cultural exchange program between human and personnel. He believes that increased understanding between our species could further improve cooperation and efficiency." H considered this proposal with interest. The idea of voluntary social interaction between humans was unprecedented within the Empire. Most integrated species maintained clear boundaries between themselves and their administrators, with contact limited to official duties and formal protocols. What specific activities does he propose? Educational sessions where humans would teach personnel about human culture, history, and psychology, while would share information about galactic civilization, advanced technologies, and the structure of the Empire. He's also suggested joint recreational activities and collaborative research projects. The proposal was both intriguing and potentially problematic. Increased contact between species could lead to better understanding and cooperation, but it could also create opportunities for humans to learn about weaknesses or advanced technologies that might be used against the Empire. However, the current improvement in productivity and stability suggested that Doctor's insights were valuable enough to warrant some calculated risks. "Schedule a meeting with Doctor for this afternoon. I want to discuss the details of this proposal personally." Later that day, H found herself in her private office with Doctor, reviewing his detailed presentation on cultural exchange. The human had prepared comprehensive materials, including psychological research on the benefits of cross-cultural understanding and proposed safeguards to address security concerns. "Doctor," H began, "your proposals show considerable thought and preparation. However, I must ask about your motivations. Why are you so invested in improving relations between our species?" Leaned back in his chair, a gesture that H had learned indicated thoughtful consideration rather than disrespect. "Commander, I believe that the current arrangement between humans is inherently unstable. It's based on a power imbalance that generates resentment on one side and mistrust on the other. Unless we can develop genuine mutual understanding and respect, this situation will eventually break down, probably violently. And you believe cultural exchange can address these fundamental issues? It's a starting point. Right now, most see humans as primitive, unpredictable creatures who need to be controlled. Most humans see as cold, domineering oppressors who view them as expendable resources. Both perspectives are oversimplifications that prevent us from recognizing our common ground and complementary strengths. H found his analysis uncomfortably accurate. She had indeed viewed humans primarily through the lens of their usefulness to the Empire, rather than as individuals with their own goals, fears, and aspirations. What common ground do you believe exists between our species? More than you might expect, both humans and are curious about the universe around them. Both have developed complex social structures and advanced technologies. Both value the welfare of their communities and have strong cultural traditions. The main differences are in how we express these characteristics and the historical circumstances that shaped our development. As spoke, H realized she was seeing him differently than she had during their first meeting. His passion for his subject was evident not just in his words, but in his body language, the subtle changes in his vocal patterns, and the way his eyes seemed to light up when discussing ideas that excited him. For the first time, she began to perceive him not just as a useful resource or potential security risk, but as an individual with his own unique perspective and personality. You mentioned complementary strengths. What did you mean by that? Excel at systematic thinking, long-term planning, and maintaining stable social structures. Humans are adaptable, creative problem solvers who thrive in chaotic or rapidly changing situations. In many ways, our species could benefit enormously from collaboration rather than domination. The conversation continued for over 2 hours, covering topics ranging from specific cultural exchange activities to broader questions about the future of human relations. H found herself increasingly impressed not just with his intelligence, but with his ability to see beyond the immediate circumstances to envision possibilities that she had never considered. As the meeting concluded, she approved a limited pilot program for cultural exchange activities, with Doctor responsible for organizing and supervising the initial sessions. The first cultural exchange session took place 3 days later in one of the station's larger conference rooms. H observed from a discreet monitoring station, watching as 12 human workers and 8 personnel gathered for what Doctor had termed an informal introduction to human cultural practices. The session began with explaining the human concept of music to the assembled. Using a portable audio device that he had constructed from available materials, he played examples of different musical styles from Earth, explaining how humans used organized sound patterns to express emotions and create shared experiences. The participants seemed initially puzzled by the concept. Communication relied heavily on telepathic elements and harmonic resonances that carried specific meaning. The idea of sound patterns that conveyed emotional content without explicit informational value was foreign to them. However, when played a recording of what he called a lullaby, a simple melody that human parents sang to help their children sleep, several of the exhibited unexpected reactions. Their skin coloration shifted to softer hues, and their telepathic emanations indicated a state of calm relaxation. "This is fascinating," Dr. Aura, the station's chief medical officer, commented. "The harmonic patterns seem to trigger involuntary neurological responses similar to those produced by meditation techniques. Music affects humans in similar ways," explained. "It can alter our mood, help us relax, energize us for work, or bring groups of people together in shared emotional experiences. Every human culture has developed musical traditions, despite the fact that music has no obvious survival advantage." Dr. Aura's multifaceted eyes focused intently on. "You mean this music serves no practical purpose for your species?" "Not in the immediate sense, no. But humans don't only do things that have practical purposes. We also do things because they're beautiful, or because they make us feel connected to each other, or simply because we enjoy them." This concept seemed to perplex the participants even more than the music itself. Society was highly efficient and purpose-driven, with most activities serving clear functions within their social or technological systems. The idea of engaging in complex behaviors purely for aesthetic or emotional reasons was almost incomprehensible to them. The session continued with demonstrating other aspects of human culture: visual art, storytelling traditions, and social customs like shared meals and celebratory gatherings. Each demonstration sparked intense discussions among the participants as they tried to understand the underlying logic of human behavior. H found herself equally fascinated by the proceedings. She had studied human behavior patterns for practical purposes, but she had never considered the possibility that human inefficiencies might actually serve important psychological and social functions. The breakthrough moment came when Dr. Aura asked to explain the human practice of gift-giving, the custom of providing objects to other individuals without expectation of direct reciprocity. Gifts serve several purposes, explained. They can express affection or respect, mark important occasions, demonstrate social status, or simply show that you were thinking about someone. The value isn't necessarily in the object itself, but in the gesture and the thought behind it. To illustrate his point, reached into his pocket and a small object that he had apparently crafted during his free time. It was a delicate sculpture made from recycled metal components, shaped to resemble a stylized flower. "Dr. Aura, this is for you," he said, offering the sculpture. "You asked excellent questions today, and I wanted to thank you for your interest in understanding human culture." Dr. Aura accepted the gift with obvious uncertainty, turning it over in her elongated fingers as she examined its construction. The sculpture was clearly the product of considerable skill and patience, with intricate details that caught the light in pleasing ways. "But why?" she asked, her confusion evident in both her voice and her telepathic emanations. "I have done nothing that merits compensation, and this object has no practical function that would benefit me." Smiled gently. "That's exactly the point. The gift isn't payment for something you've done, it's an expression of appreciation and an invitation to friendship. And its value isn't in what it can do, but in the fact that someone took the time and effort to create something beautiful specifically for you." H watched as Dr. Aura's skin color shifted to a pattern she had never seen before, a subtle interplay of blues and silvers that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. The medical officer continued to examine the sculpture, her telepathic emanations indicating a complex mixture of confusion, curiosity, and something that might have been wonder. "It is aesthetically pleasing," Dr. Aura finally admitted. "The proportions create a sense of balance, and the surface textures produce interesting optical effects. But I still do not understand why you would create this for me." "Because I wanted to," replied simply. "Because I thought you might enjoy it. Because creating beautiful things and sharing them with others is part of what makes us human." The session ended shortly afterward, but H could see that the participants were deeply affected by what they had experienced. As they filed out of the conference room, she noticed them examining their surroundings with new attention, as if they were seeing the functional spaces of the station through different eyes. Dr. Aura remained behind, still holding his gift and studying it with obvious fascination. When she finally looked up, her multifaceted eyes met H's through the observation window. "Commander," Dr. Aura's voice came through the communication system, "I believe Doctor may have introduced us to concepts that could fundamentally change our understanding of consciousness and civilization." Over the following weeks, the cultural exchange program expanded rapidly. Personnel began requesting participation in human cultural activities, while humans showed eager interest in learning about science and technology. The initial wariness and mistrust on both sides began to give way to genuine curiosity and, in some cases, friendship. H found herself drawn into these interactions more than she had anticipated. She attended several sessions as an observer, then began participating more actively as her interest in human perspectives grew. She learned about human concepts of humor, artistic expression, and social bonding that had no direct equivalent in culture. But it was during a session on human philosophical traditions that something unexpected happened. Was explaining the human concept of beauty. The idea that certain visual, auditory, or conceptual patterns could evoke powerful positive emotional responses without serving any practical purpose. "Beauty is subjective," he was saying, "meaning that different individuals may find beauty in different things. But there seem to be some patterns that most humans find appealing. symmetry, proportion, harmony between different elements, and what we call elegance, the quality of achieving maximum impact with minimum complexity. Dr. Ara, who had become one of the most enthusiastic participants in the cultural exchange program, raised her hand. Doctor, by these criteria, would you consider physical forms to be beautiful? Paused thoughtfully before answering. That's an interesting question. Anatomy is certainly elegant in an engineering sense. Your proportions seem perfectly adapted to your functional requirements, and there's a mathematical precision to your features that humans often find aesthetically pleasing. Your ability to change skin coloration creates visual effects that many humans would consider beautiful. He looked around the room at the assembled, his gaze lingering momentarily on H. But beauty isn't just about physical characteristics. It can also come from grace of movement, intelligence, kindness, or the way someone expresses their thoughts and emotions. By those standards, I've encountered considerable beauty among the I've met here. H felt an unexpected warmth at his words, accompanied by a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest cavity that she couldn't identify. She had never considered the possibility that a human might find characteristics appealing, much less beautiful. After the session ended, she found herself approaching as he gathered his materials. "Doctor, may I speak with you privately?" "Of course, Commander. Is there something I can help you with?" They walked together to a quiet observation lounge overlooking the asteroid mining operations. For several minutes, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the automated mining drones extract precious minerals from the rocky fragments that drifted past the station. "Dr. H finally said, I wanted to thank you for what you've accomplished here. The improvements in productivity and cooperation have exceeded all projections." "I'm glad the programs have been successful, Commander. But I hope you know that the real credit belongs to everyone who's been willing to participate and keep an open mind about new possibilities." H turned to study his profile as he watched the mining operations. There was something about his calm confidence and genuine interest in others that she found increasingly attractive. Not attractive in any physical sense. The biological differences between their species made such considerations irrelevant, but attractive in some deeper way that she couldn't quite define. "Doctor, when you spoke about finding beauty among, did you mean that sincerely?" Turned to meet her gaze directly, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the observation windows. "Commander, I've learned that beauty can be found in the most unexpected places. Intelligence applied with wisdom, strength tempered with compassion, the courage to question your own assumptions and grow beyond them. By those standards, yes, I find much beauty among the I've come to know." As he spoke, H realized that her perception of this remarkable human had evolved far beyond her initial assessment. He was no longer simply a useful resource or a fascinating subject of study. Somewhere in the process of watching him bridge the gap between their species with patience, intelligence, and genuine care for both sides, she had begun to see him as something much more complex and valuable. The mining station continued its endless orbit, but within its corridors, two very different species were discovering that understanding and appreciation could develop in ways that neither had thought possible. And in that discovery lay the seeds of changes that would transform not just their small corner of the galaxy, but their understanding of what it meant to find beauty in the universe. The emergency alarm echoed through its corridors at 3:47 station time, its harsh tone cutting through the artificial night cycle like a blade. Commander H arrived at the command center within minutes, her ceremonial robes hastily thrown over her sleeping garments, to find Lieutenant A coordinating with the night shift operations team. "Report," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority that had been trained into her since childhood. "Commander, we've lost contact with Mining Platform 7. Last transmission was a routine status update at 3:30, but they failed to respond to the scheduled 3:45 check-in. Long-range sensors are showing unusual energy readings from that sector." H moved to the tactical display, her multifaceted eyes quickly analyzing the three-dimensional representation of the asteroid field. Platform 7 was one of the more remote installations, positioned near the edge of the mining zone where the richest mineral deposits had been discovered. It operated with a crew of 47, 32 humans and 15. "What's the composition of the emergency response team?" "Standard protocol calls for a mixed crew. But given the recent tensions reported from the outer colonies, Admiral's directive suggests using primarily personnel for security operations. The tensions are referred to had been escalating over the past month. Intelligence reports suggested that human resistance movements were becoming more organized and sophisticated in their activities. Several mining installations in other systems had experienced sabotage incidents, and there were rumors of humans attempting to steal advanced technology. "Commander," the communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a distress signal from Platform 7. Audio only, heavily distorted." "Put it through the speakers." The voice that emerged from the communication system was barely recognizable through the static and interference, but H could identify it as human. The transmission lasted only a few seconds before cutting to silence. "Under attack, unknown vessels, structural damage to fusion core, require immediate." "Can you clean up that signal?" H asked. "Working on it, Commander, but the interference suggests massive electromagnetic disruption around Platform 7. Either equipment failure or hostile action," H finished grimly. "Prepare emergency response Team Alpha for immediate deployment. I want heavy shields and full weapons complement." "Commander," I said quietly, "perhaps it would be advisable to contact Doctor. If humans are involved in this incident, his insights could be valuable." H hesitated. Her growing personal interest in the human cultural liaison had not escaped her own self-awareness, and she was concerned about allowing personal feelings to influence tactical decisions. However, A's suggestion had merit from a purely operational standpoint. "Contact Doctor and ask him to report to the command center immediately." Arrived 15 minutes later, still alert despite having been awakened from sleep. He had dressed quickly but completely, and H noticed that he carried a small emergency kit that suggested he had some experience with crisis situations. "Doctor, we have a situation at Platform 7. I would appreciate your assessment of the human psychological factors that might be involved." She briefed him quickly on the lost communications, the distress signal, and the broader context of resistance activities in other systems. Listened intently, asking several questions about the platform's crew composition and recent morale reports. "Commander, may I speak freely?" "Please do." "Based on what I know about the humans assigned to Platform 7, it's highly unlikely they would initiate hostile action against personnel. The crew includes several individuals I've worked with closely, people who have been genuinely committed to making the integration process succeed. But you cannot rule out external influence, resistance members from other installations or even from Earth." Was quiet for a moment, and H could see him weighing multiple factors in his assessment. "External influence is possible, but there's another scenario you should consider. Platform 7 is isolated and operates with minimal oversight. If something went wrong, equipment failure, accident, unexpected asteroid collision, the crew might be struggling with emergency repairs under difficult conditions." The distress signal mentioned being under attack. "Commander, humans under extreme stress sometimes perceive threats that don't exist, or they may interpret equipment failures as hostile action. The electromagnetic interference could be coming from damaged fusion systems rather than enemy weapons." Lieutenant stepped forward. "Doctor, are you suggesting we treat this as a rescue operation rather than a potential combat situation?" "I'm suggesting you prepare for both possibilities, but approach with the assumption that you're dealing with people who need help rather than enemies who need to be defeated." H considered his recommendation. Standard military doctrine emphasized overwhelming force and decisive action when facing potential threats. However, if Doctor was correct and the Platform 7 crew was dealing with an emergency rather than mounting a resistance operation, a heavy-handed response could escalate the situation unnecessarily. "Doctor, would you be willing to accompany the response team? Your presence might help de-escalate tensions if human psychology becomes a factor." "Of course, Commander, though I should point out that I have no military training or combat experience. Your role would be strictly advisory and communication support." 30 minutes later, the response vessel's Honor departed 442 with a crew of 20, 12 security personnel, 6 engineering specialists, and Doctor. H commanded the mission personally, partly from tactical necessity and partly from a growing sense that the crisis at Platform 7 might prove to be a turning point in human relations. The journey to Platform 7 took nearly 3 hours, during which long-range sensors provided increasingly troubling information. The platform's power output was fluctuating wildly. Several sections appeared to have suffered structural damage, and the electromagnetic interference was intensifying rather than diminishing. "Commander," the sensor operator reported, "I'm detecting debris fields consistent with destroyed vessels, at least 2, possibly 3 small craft. Classification: unknown design, but the materials analysis suggests human construction, improvised rather than standard manufacturing." Doctor looked up from the intelligence reports he had been reviewing. "Commander, that supports the external influence theory. If Resistance members attempted to liberate the platform's human workers, it could explain both the destroyed vessels and the platform's condition." As they approached Platform 7, the situation became clearer and more complex. The mining platform hung at an awkward angle, its main structural beam bent, and several external modules showing signs of explosive damage. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the facility's hull, and there was no sign of normal operational activity. "Commander, we're being hailed by the platform." On screen, the image that appeared was of Chief Engineer, one of the human workers Doctor had specifically mentioned as being committed to cooperation. The man's face was streaked with grime and exhaustion, and his voice carried the strain of someone who had been dealing with crisis for hours. "Vessel, this is Platform 7. Thank God you're here. We've got injured personnel and critical systems failing. Request immediate emergency assistance." "Chief, this is Commander H aboard this Honor. Can you clarify the nature of your emergency?" "Commander, we were attacked approximately 4 hours ago by unknown vessels. 3 ships, human design but not from any official Earth fleet. They demanded we surrender the platform's personnel and advanced equipment. When we refused, they opened fire." "What happened to the attacking vessels?" His expression became grim. 2 were destroyed when they hit the platform's defensive shields, the 3rd after taking heavy damage. But the attack damaged our fusion core containment system, and we've got hull breaches in sections 4 through 7. Doctor leaned toward the communication pickup. "Chief, this is Doctor. How many casualties?" "Doctor, I'm glad you're here. We've got 6 injured, 3 humans and 3. Dr. Aura is treating them in the medical bay, but she needs supplies and additional equipment." The mention of Dr. Aura sent a relief through H that surprised her with its intensity. The medical officer had been one of the most active participants in the cultural exchange program and had developed what appeared to be genuine friendships with several human workers. "Chief," H continued, "we're prepared to provide emergency assistance, but I need to understand the current security situation. Are you certain the attacking vessels have withdrawn?" "As far as we can tell, yes. But Commander, there's something else you need to know. The attackers. They weren't just trying to steal equipment or liberate human workers. They were looking for specific technical information about shield generators and power systems." This information changed the strategic implications significantly. Industrial espionage and technology theft represented a much more serious threat to the Empire than simple resistance activities. "Doctor," H said quietly, "does this change your assessment of human psychological factors?" "Yes and no," replied thoughtfully. "The Platform 7 crew's resistance to the attackers suggests their loyalty to the cooperative arrangement we've established. But the existence of organized groups with access to weapons and detailed intelligence about technology indicates a level of resistance planning that goes far beyond spontaneous rebellion." The docking procedure took place under heavy security, with personnel maintaining full combat readiness, while engineering teams began emergency repairs to Platform 7's damaged systems. Doctor accompanied H as they entered the platform to assess the situation personally. The interior of Platform 7 showed clear signs of battle. Corridor walls were by energy weapon impacts. Emergency barriers had been erected to seal hull breaches, and the lighting systems flickered intermittently as overloaded power systems struggled to maintain basic functions. They found Dr. Aura in the medical bay, treating a human worker who had suffered severe burns during the attack. Her usually pristine laboratory coat was stained with various substances, and her skin showed the stress patterns that indicated prolonged telepathic strain from treating injured patients. "Dr. Aura," H said as they entered, "what is the status of the injured?" "Commander, I am very pleased to see you." The relief in her voice was evident. "The injuries are serious but not life-threatening, assuming I can maintain proper treatment protocols. However, I have exhausted most of my medical supplies, and the platform's emergency systems are insufficient for extended care." Doctor moved to assist her, checking on the injured workers with practiced efficiency. H noticed how naturally he fell into the role of medical assistant, anticipating Dr. Aura's needs and communicating with the injured humans in ways that seemed to calm their distress. "Dr. Aura, can you describe what happened during the attack?" "The human workers and personnel fought together to defend the platform," she reported as she continued her medical procedures. "There was no division based on species. Everyone worked to repel the attackers and protect their colleagues. It was remarkable." Chief appeared in the doorway. "Commander, if you have a moment, I'd like to show you something that might be important for your investigation." They followed him to the platform's security center, where damaged monitoring equipment still functioned well enough to replay recordings of the attack. The footage showed 3 vessels of crude but effective design approaching the platform under stealth conditions, then opening fire when their demands were refused. "The attackers knew exactly where our defensive systems were located," explained. "They targeted the shield generators first, then tried to breach the sections where our most advanced equipment is stored. This wasn't a random attack. They had detailed intelligence about our operations." Doctor studied the recordings with obvious concern. "Commander, this suggests infiltration of human communication networks on a level that goes far beyond anything we've seen before. These attackers had information that could only have come from high-level sources within either the Earth government or the resistance movement." "Or both," H said grimly. The investigation continued for several hours, revealing the full scope of what had occurred. The attacking force had indeed been composed of human resistance members, but they had been equipped with weapons and intelligence that indicated support from sources within the official Earth government. Their target had been specific technologies that could dramatically enhance human military capabilities. What impressed H most, however, was the response of Platform 7's regular crew. When faced with attackers of their own species who demanded they betray their colleagues, both humans and had chosen to fight together to defend their shared workplace and community. "This changes everything," she said to Doctor as they observed the joint human repair efforts taking place throughout the platform. "In what way, Commander?" "The integration experiment here has succeeded beyond our expectations. These people didn't just work together out of necessity. They chose to protect each other when it mattered most. They've formed genuine bonds that transcended species loyalty." Doctor smiled, though his expression remained serious due to the circumstances. "Commander, I think what you're seeing is the natural result of treating people with respect and giving them opportunities to know each other as individuals rather than representatives of their species." As emergency repairs continued, and the wounded were transported to 442 for advanced medical treatment, H found herself reflecting on the implications of what they had witnessed. The attack on Platform 7 had been intended to drive a wedge between humans, but instead it had demonstrated the possibility of genuine cooperation and loyalty between their species. However, it had also revealed the existence of organized resistance forces with capabilities far beyond what Imperial intelligence had previously detected. The war between humanity and the Empire might have officially ended, but a new and potentially more dangerous conflict was clearly beginning. "Doctor," she said as they prepared to return to 442, "I want to expand the cultural exchange program to all installations under my command. What happened here proves that mutual understanding and respect can create bonds strong enough to withstand external pressure." "I agree, Commander, but we'll also need to address the intelligence leaks that made this attack possible. If resistance forces have access to detailed information about our operations and technology, they'll continue to pose a serious threat." "Any suggestions?" Was quiet for a long moment, watching as human and engineers worked side by side to repair the platform's damaged fusion core. "Start by expanding the integration of human and personnel at all levels, not just in labor assignments. Make it harder for resistance forces to target installations by making it clear that attacks on facilities will also harm human workers who have chosen to be there. And most importantly, give humans genuine reasons to prefer cooperation over resistance. What kind of reasons? Opportunities for advancement, access to education and training, the possibility of eventually earning full citizenship rights within the empire. People will fight for abstract concepts like freedom, but they'll work for concrete opportunities to build better lives for themselves and their families. As Honor departed Platform 7 with the wounded and a full report of the incident, H realized that doctors' recommendations would require fundamental changes to imperial policy regarding integrated species. Such changes would need approval from the highest levels of government and would likely face significant resistance from traditional elements within society. But the events at Platform 7 had demonstrated something that could not be ignored. When humans worked together as equals rather than as captors and captives, they could achieve remarkable things. And in a galaxy where new threats were emerging from unexpected directions, such cooperation might prove to be essential for the survival of both species. The emergency had passed, but its consequences would reshape everything that followed. And at the center of those changes would be the growing understanding between a commander and a human scientist who had begun to see past the boundaries of species and culture to recognize something much more profound. The beauty that could emerge when different forms of intelligence chose to work together toward common goals. The Imperial Council chambers on Prime represented the pinnacle of architectural achievement in the galaxy, their crystalline walls reaching toward a dome that captured and refracted the light of twin suns into patterns of breathtaking complexity. Commander H stood before the semicircular assembly of the Empire's highest-ranking officials, her formal presentation materials displayed in three-dimensional holographic detail above the central podium. 6 weeks had passed since the attack on Platform 7, and the intelligence gathered from that incident had revealed the scope of organized human resistance activities throughout the outer territories. What had begun as isolated incidents of sabotage and theft had evolved into a coordinated campaign aimed at acquiring advanced technology and disrupting the integration programs that had been showing such promising results. Honored counselors, H began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustically perfect environment. The evidence presented today demonstrates that our current approach to human integration requires fundamental revision. The resistance activities we have observed are not random acts of rebellion, but sophisticated operations supported by high-level infiltration of both Earth's governmental structures and our own administrative systems. Admiral, representing the military faction within the Council, activated his speaking platform. Commander H, your reports indicate that increased integration and cooperation with human populations actually strengthened their loyalty to the Empire during the Platform 7 incident. How do you reconcile this with the evidence of organized resistance activities? Honored Admiral, the key distinction lies in the difference between humans who have been given genuine opportunities for advancement and cooperation, versus those who remain in positions of limited autonomy with no realistic path to improvement. Platform 7's crew fought alongside personnel because they had developed personal relationships and shared investments in their community's success. The resistance members who attacked them were motivated by desperation and a belief that cooperation offered them nothing. Counselor, the Empire's most senior, leaned forward in her observation alcove. Commander, your cultural liaison program has produced remarkable improvements in productivity and stability. However, expanding such programs empire-wide would require granting humans access to advanced technologies and classified information. Are you prepared to recommend such unprecedented access to a species that has demonstrated both resistance activities and remarkable adaptability? This was the critical question that H had been anticipating. Doctor had spent considerable time helping her prepare for this presentation, analyzing the political and strategic implications of each recommendation from multiple perspectives. Honored Counselor, I believe the question is not whether we can afford to grant humans increased access and opportunities, but whether we can afford to continue denying them. The resistance movements exist precisely because current policies offer no legitimate path for human advancement within imperial society. By maintaining artificial barriers, we create conditions that make resistance appear to be the only viable option for humans who refuse to accept permanent subjugation. You are proposing a fundamental shift from the Empire's standard integration protocols, observed Counselor, whose portfolio included oversight of conquered territories. Such changes would affect not only humans, but every species within our sphere of influence. What assurance can you provide that humans will not abuse expanded privileges to undermine imperial security? H activated the next section of her presentation, displaying detailed psychological profiles and behavioral analysis data that had been compiled over months of observation. The evidence suggests that humans respond to trust and opportunity with increased loyalty and productivity. Their social psychology is fundamentally different from most species we have encountered. They form stronger emotional bonds with individuals and communities than with abstract political structures. By providing them with genuine stake in imperial society, we convert potential enemies into committed allies. The presentation continued for nearly 2 hours, covering economic analysis, security considerations, and detailed implementation proposals. Throughout the session, H found herself drawing on insights and perspectives that she had gained through her extensive interactions with Doctor and the cultural exchange programs. As the formal presentation concluded, Grand Counselor, the Empire's supreme civilian authority, activated the chamber's privacy protocols. The crystalline walls shifted to opacity, and electromagnetic shielding ensured that their discussion would remain confidential. Commander H, the Grand Counselor said, your proposals are both compelling and concerning. The integration successes you have achieved are undeniable, but the scope of changes you recommend would represent the most significant policy shift in imperial history. Before we proceed with formal consideration, I must ask about your personal relationship with the human cultural liaison who has influenced these recommendations. H had expected this question, but it still sent a flutter of nervousness through her psychic emanations. The political system placed enormous emphasis on objectivity and rational decision-making, and any suggestion that personal feelings might influence policy recommendations could undermine her credibility. Grand Counselor, Doctor has indeed provided valuable insights into human psychology and behavior. However, my recommendations are based on empirical evidence gathered from multiple installations and thousands of individual case studies. The data supports these conclusions regardless of the source of the initial insights. That may be true, Commander, but perception of objectivity is often as important as actual objectivity in matters of imperial policy. There have been reports that you and this human have developed an unusually close working relationship. Admiral activated his speaking platform again. Grand Counselor, if I may interject, I have observed Commander H's work for over a decade, and I have never known her to allow personal considerations to compromise her professional judgment. Her analysis of human psychology has proven accurate in every practical test, including the defense of Platform 7. Furthermore, added Dr. Ara, who had been invited to provide expert testimony about the medical and psychological aspects of human integration, the improvements in human psychological stability and physical health under the modified protocols have exceeded all projections. Whatever insights Doctor has provided have demonstrably benefited both human workers and imperial operations. The discussion continued for another hour, examining every aspect of H's proposals from multiple angles. Finally, Grand Counselor called for a preliminary consensus evaluation. The Council will consider Commander H's recommendations for expanded human integration protocols. However, given the scope and implications of these changes, we require additional evidence of their viability. Commander, you are hereby authorized to implement a comprehensive pilot program across all installations under your direct command. You will have 6 months to demonstrate the effectiveness of your proposed policies before the Council makes a final determination. Thank you, Grand Counselor. I accept the responsibility for this pilot program. There is one additional requirement, the Grand Counselor continued. Doctor and his cultural exchange programs will be transferred to a new position as Special Advisor for Relations, reporting directly to Imperial Command. His insights have proven valuable, but they must be available to the Empire as a whole rather than limited to your specific command. H felt a sharp pang of something that might have been loss at the announcement. While Doctor's promotion represented recognition of his contributions, it also meant that their close working relationship would necessarily change. I understand, Grand Counselor. The council session is concluded. Commander H, Admiral, please remain for additional briefing on implementation details. As the other counselors filed out of the chamber, H found herself alone with Admiral and the senior military staff, who would oversee the expanded pilot program. H, the Admiral said, using the informal address that indicated a shift to personal rather than official communication. I want you to know that I support your recommendations, but I'm also concerned about the risks involved. If this pilot program fails, it won't just end your career. It could destabilize human relations throughout the Empire. I understand the stakes, Admiral. I hope you do, because there are elements within the military and civilian government who view your approach as dangerously naive. They believe that humans are fundamentally incompatible with imperial civilization, and they're looking for evidence to support more aggressive control measures. What kind of measures? Admiral's expression became grim. Forced relocation to dedicated colonies, genetic modification to reduce aggression and independence, systematic separation of human children from their parents for accelerated assimilation. The kind of policies we've used with species that proved completely incompatible with voluntary integration. The implications sent a chill through H's nervous system. Such measures would destroy everything that made humanity unique and valuable, reducing them to a pale imitation of psychology. Admiral, that approach would eliminate the very qualities that make humans useful to the Empire. Their adaptability, creativity, and independent thinking are precisely the characteristics that have made them effective workers and valuable allies. I agree completely, but if your pilot program fails to demonstrate sustainable cooperation, they will argue that those qualities make humans too dangerous to remain autonomous. The conversation continued for another hour, covering logistical details and security protocols for the expanded integration program. When it finally concluded, H found herself walking through the corridors of Imperial Command with a heavy weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The success or failure of the next 6 months would determine not only the future of human relations, but the fate of an entire species. If she could demonstrate that genuine cooperation and mutual respect could create stable, productive relationships between humans, and it might lead to a new model for imperial expansion and governance. If she failed, humans might face a future of systematic oppression that would crush their spirit and eliminate their unique contributions to galactic civilization. As she boarded the transport vessel that would return her to 442, H realized that she would be working with Doctor for only a few more weeks before his transfer to Imperial Command. The thought of losing his daily counsel and friendship created an unexpected sense of urgency about expressing feelings that she had been reluctant to acknowledge even to herself. The return journey to 442 took 3 days, during which H found herself reviewing not only the technical aspects of implementing the expanded pilot program, but also her personal relationship with the remarkable human who had catalyzed so many changes in her thinking and perspective. Doctor had entered her life as a useful resource for understanding human psychology and improving operational efficiency. Over the months of working together, he had become something much more significant, a trusted advisor, a source of insights that had challenged her fundamental assumptions about relations, and increasingly, a friend whose opinions and approval had become important to her in ways that extended far beyond professional considerations. The realization that she had developed what humans would call feelings for someone of an entirely different species was both fascinating and troubling. Society had little precedent for such cross-species emotional attachments, and she was uncertain how to understand or act upon these feelings. When she finally returned to 442, she found Doctor in his quarters, preparing materials for the transition of his programs to other personnel. His new appointment would require him to establish cultural exchange and integration protocols at installations throughout the Empire, beginning with a tour of the core worlds to present his findings to senior administrators and military commanders. Doctor, she said as he looked up from his data compilation, I wanted to personally congratulate you on your promotion. Your contributions to relations have been recognized at the highest levels of imperial government. Thank you, Commander, though I have to admit, I'm going to miss the work we've been doing here. Has become something special, a genuine community where humans and have learned to see each other as individuals rather than just representatives of their species. paused in his organizing activities, and looked at her with the direct attention that she had come to appreciate. "Commander, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "What do you think will happen to the relationships we've built here once the programs are expanded empire-wide? Can the trust and understanding we've developed survive bureaucratic scaling and political oversight?" It was a question that had been troubling H as well. The intimate, personal nature of the connections that had developed might be difficult to replicate in larger, more formal settings. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I believe the principles we've discovered here, treating people as individuals, providing genuine opportunities for advancement, building trust through shared experiences, those principles should be transferable if we're careful about implementation." "I hope you're right, because what we've accomplished here proves that humans can be more than just tolerant or cooperative allies. We can be genuine friends, people who care about each other's welfare and happiness regardless of species differences." As he spoke, H realized that the conversation was approaching territory that she had been both longing for and dreading. The professional relationship that had brought them together was ending, and she might never have another opportunity to express the feelings that had been growing stronger with each passing day. "Doctor, there's something I want you to know before you leave for your new assignment." He stopped his organizing completely and gave her his full attention. "Working with you has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career, not just because of the professional success we've achieved, but because you've taught me to see my own species and others with new perspective. You've shown me that intelligence and wisdom can take forms I never expected, and that beauty can be found in the most unlikely places." Smiled with the warmth that had become so familiar to her. "Commander, I could say the same about working with you. You've demonstrated that authority can be exercised with compassion, that strength doesn't require domination, and that leadership means bringing out the best in everyone around you." They stood facing each other in the quiet of his quarters, both aware that something significant was passing between them, but uncertain how to navigate the complexities of expressing emotions that had no precedent in either of their cultures. H said softly, "In all my years of command and all my studies of different species, I have never encountered anyone who combined intelligence, compassion, and integrity the way you do. You are remarkable, and I want you to know that you are valued not just for what you can do, but for who you are." "Commander H, that means more to me than you could possibly know." As the moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding and mutual appreciation, H realized that regardless of what the future might bring for their respective species, the connection they had forged would remain one of the most important relationships of her life. The pilot program would proceed, the fate of human relations would be determined by politics and practical results, and their professional paths would diverge as they each took on new responsibilities. But the friendship and respect they had developed would endure, serving as proof that understanding and appreciation could bridge even the vast differences between species that had evolved on different worlds, under different stars, with different ways of perceiving the universe. And in that understanding lay the foundation for everything that would follow in the months and years ahead, as two civilizations learned to see past their differences to discover the beauty that could emerge when different forms of consciousness chose to work together toward shared goals of growth, discovery, and mutual prosperity. The observation deck of the Imperial flagship Eternal Harmony provided a panoramic view of the 442 system as it had been transformed over the past year. Where once a single mining station had hung in solitary operation, now a thriving complex of interconnected platforms, research facilities, and residential modules created a small city among the stars. Ships of human and design moved freely between installations, their crews working together with an efficiency that had become the standard throughout the pilot program territories. Doctor stood at the viewing port, watching the coordinated dance of vessels and installations with the satisfaction of someone whose vision had become reality. His new uniform bore the insignia of Special Advisor for Relations, a position that had grown far beyond its original scope, as the success of the integration programs had spread throughout the Empire. "The transformation is remarkable," came a familiar voice behind him. Turned to see Commander H approaching, her own uniform updated with the rank insignia of Regional Governor, a promotion that reflected her success in implementing the pilot programs across 7 star systems. "Governor," said with a smile, I didn't expect to see you until the formal ceremony tomorrow. I wanted to arrive early to observe the preparations personally. This event will be watched throughout the Empire, and its success could determine the future of relations for generations. Tomorrow's ceremony would mark the official conclusion of the pilot program and the announcement of empire-wide policy changes that had been under consideration by the Imperial Council for months. Representatives from dozens of worlds had traveled to 442 to witness the formal signing of the new integration protocols, which would grant human populations throughout the Empire unprecedented rights and opportunities for advancement. "Are you nervous about the announcement?" asked as H joined him at the viewing port. "Cautiously optimistic," she replied. "The statistical evidence supports our approach overwhelmingly. Productivity has increased by an average of 37% across all pilot installations. Resistance activities have virtually disappeared in territories where the new protocols have been implemented. Most significantly, loyalty and cooperation indices have reached levels that exceed those recorded for most voluntarily integrated species." "But," prompted, recognizing the undertone of concern in her voice, "but there remain elements within both Imperial and human leadership who view these changes as dangerous precedents. Some fear that granting humans too much autonomy will encourage other subject species to demand similar treatment. Some humans worry that increased integration will lead to cultural assimilation and the loss of human identity." As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Ara approached across the observation deck. The medical officer had been promoted to Director of Health Services, overseeing medical protocols for all non-populations within the Empire. "Governor Doctor," she said in greeting, "I wanted to inform you that the human delegation has arrived and been accommodated according to their cultural requirements. However, their leader, Ambassador Harrison, has requested a private meeting before tomorrow's ceremony." Ambassador Harrison represented the newly formed Earth Coalition government, which had emerged from the complex negotiations that had followed the success of the pilot programs. Unlike the previous Earth leadership, which had been divided between collaboration and resistance factions, the coalition government represented a unified human position based on the principle that cooperation with the Empire could benefit both species if properly structured. "What's the ambassador's specific concern?" H asked. "She wants assurance that the cultural preservation clauses in the new protocols will be enforced. Apparently, there are segments of the human population who fear that integration success will lead to pressure for humans to abandon their unique cultural characteristics in favor of norms." Nodded thoughtfully. "That's been a consistent concern throughout the process. Humans value their cultural diversity and independence, even when they're willing to cooperate politically and economically. They want to be partners, not converts. Perhaps it would be useful for you to attend the meeting with Ambassador Harrison," H suggested. "Your perspective on balancing integration with cultural preservation would be valuable." The meeting with Ambassador Harrison took place in a conference room that had been specifically designed to accommodate both human and psychological comfort zones. The lighting could be adjusted for optimal visual acuity for both species. The seating arrangements allowed for natural postures and personal space preferences, and the acoustic properties enhanced communication clarity across different vocal ranges. Ambassador Harrison was a woman in her mid-50s whose career had included diplomatic service, military leadership, and academic research in interstellar relations. She had been chosen to represent Earth, specifically, because of her ability to understand both the practical necessities of cooperation with the Empire and the cultural concerns that motivated human resistance to assimilation. "Governor H. Doctor," she began after the formal courtesies had been concluded, "I want to be clear that the coalition government supports the new integration protocols and recognizes the benefits they offer to human populations throughout the Empire. However, I need explicit assurance that these protocols will not be used as a stepping stone toward cultural homogenization." "Ambassador," H replied, "the protocols specifically guarantee the right of human communities to maintain their cultural practices, languages, social structures, and educational traditions. Integration refers to political and economic cooperation, not cultural assimilation." "I appreciate those written guarantees, Governor, but I'm concerned about implementation at the local level. Will individual administrators respect human cultural autonomy when it conflicts with imperial efficiency standards?" Will human communities have recourse if their cultural rights are violated? Doctor leaned forward. Ambassador, that's exactly why the protocols include provisions for mixed arbitration committees and cultural liaison positions at every level of administration. The goal is to prevent conflicts between cultural autonomy and operational efficiency, not to resolve them in favor of efficiency. Furthermore, Dr. Ara added, the medical and psychological research conducted during the pilot programs has demonstrated that human productivity and loyalty actually increase when their cultural practices are respected and accommodated. Preservation of human cultural identity serves imperial interests as well as human ones. The discussion continued for over 2 hours, covering specific scenarios and potential conflicts that might arise as the new protocols were implemented across thousands of worlds and hundreds of different human communities. Ambassador Harrison's questions were detailed and sometimes challenging, but they reflected genuine concern for human welfare rather than opposition to cooperation with the Empire. As the meeting concluded, Ambassador Harrison made a request that surprised everyone present. Governor, Doctor, would you be willing to conduct a brief tour of the 442 installations? I'd like to observe the integration programs in operation before I make my final recommendations to the coalition government. The tour began at the original mining station, now expanded and modernized, but still recognizable as the site where human cooperation had first been tested. They visited the residential sections where human and families lived in adjacent but culturally appropriate quarters, the educational facilities where children of both species learned together while maintaining their distinct cultural curricula, and the research laboratories where mixed teams had produced innovations that neither species could have achieved independently. At each location, Ambassador Harrison spoke privately with both human and personnel, asking detailed questions about their experiences, concerns, and recommendations. Notice that she paid particular attention to the subtle details of daily interaction: how people greeted each other, how decisions were made in mixed groups, how conflicts were resolved when they arose. The final stop on the tour was the cultural center that had grown out of Doctor's original exchange programs. The facility now hosted regular events that allowed both species to share their artistic traditions, scientific discoveries, and social customs. As they entered the main auditorium, a rehearsal was in progress for tomorrow's ceremony entertainment, a collaborative performance that combined harmonic resonance techniques with human musical traditions. The effect was extraordinary. The participants created complex patterns of sound that seemed to resonate directly with the listener's nervous system, while the human musicians added melodic structures and rhythmic variations that gave the harmonics emotional depth and narrative progression. The resulting composition was unlike anything either species had produced independently, and its beauty transcended the cultural boundaries that had once seemed insurmountable. As the rehearsal concluded, Ambassador Harrison turned to